And someone is making a decision for you right now. Not your boss, not your government, not some algorithm buried inside your phone. A person. In cause of being sitting across from you, standing next to you, or speaking to you through a screen is quietly reshaping the way you think, feel. And in the most disturbing part, you are nodding along, believing every word is your own thought. And this is not paranoia. This is neuro-linguistic programming. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. NLP was not born in a laboratory with white coats and peer-reviewed studies. It was built in the 1970s by a linguist named John Grinder and a psychology student named Richard Bandler. In Cabe, you sat in rooms watching three of the most effective therapists of their generation, Milton Erickson, Fritz Perls, and Virginia Satir, and asked one question: what exactly are these people doing that makes them so effective? They watched the words, they watched the body, and they watched the rhythm of conversation. And what they extracted was a toolkit, a set of repeatable patterns that could shift a person's internal experience from the outside in. And the therapists used these patterns to heal. What happened next is where the story gets complicated. A toolkit that helped a trauma survivor rebuild her sense of self also became the favorite instrument of every high-pressure sales, every charismatic cult leader, and every emotionally manipulative partner who ever made someone feel like they were going crazy. And the techniques do not care who uses them. They work regardless, and that is precisely why understanding them, not just knowing they exist, understanding how they function at the level of language and neurology is one of the most important things a person can do in the modern world. And what follows is not a self-help lecture. It is a decoder. End of this, the viewer will be able to sit in any conversation, any sales pitch, any political speech, and see the machinery underneath, in the strings, the pulleys, in carefully placed words, doing work that the surface meaning was never meant to do alone. There are 5 core mechanisms. Each one is invisible until it is named. After that, it is everywhere. And first is anchoring. The first is anchoring. The human brain is, at its most fundamental level, an association machine. It does not store experiences the way a hard drive stores files. It stores them in clusters, sensory, emotional, contextual, so that one element of a past experience can pull the entire emotional weight of that experience back into the present moment. And this is not a flaw, it is a survival feature. The smell of smoke triggers alertness before the brain has consciously registered why. And the sound of a particular song returns a person to a specific night years ago with a physical force that reason alone cannot explain. Anchoring is the deliberate use of this mechanism. Here is how it works in practice. A skilled NLP practitioner or manipulator, the technique is identical. Watches for a moment when the other person reaches an emotional peak. Joy, excitement, trust, nostalgia. At that exact moment, they introduce a specific stimulus. A touch on the shoulder. A particular word or phrase spoken in a particular tone, a gesture. The stimulus itself is neutral. But because it coincides with the emotional peak, the brain links them. The anchor is set. From that point forward, triggering the stimulus into word, the gesture, and pulls the associated emotion back into the body without the person understanding why they suddenly feel warm toward this individual, into why they suddenly feel confident, or why they suddenly feel that this is a good idea. And consider a salesperson who, early in a conversation, asks a client to remember a time they made a decision they were truly proud of. In a way, they let the client sit in that feeling, really sit in it, and at the peak of the recollection. In two, not one, two trangs, they place their hand briefly on the client's forearm and say a specific phrase, something like that kind of clarity. In the pitch, when resistance begins to build, they use the same touch, the same phrase. And the client feels a wash of confidence and positive association they cannot trace to anything specific. The resistance softens, and the signature happens. This is not science fiction. Anthony Robbins built a global enterprise on public anchoring. He creates physical states through movement and sound, fires anchors through touch and repetition, and sends audiences home genuinely transformed because the neurological process is real. And the question is never whether the tool works. The question is always who is holding it and toward what end. And recognizing anchoring in real time requires one simple habit. When an unexpected emotion arises during a conversation, and to pause before acting on it, ask where it came from. If the answer is not clear, slow down. Emotions that appear without obvious cause are sometimes genuine intuition, and sometimes they are a trigger someone else set. And the second mechanism is mirroring, and it is so natural that most people engage in it without any training whatsoever. When two people are in genuine rapport, genuinely comfortable with each other, their bodies begin to synchronize. Breathing rates align. Breathing rates align. In posture, echoes. The pace of speech converges. Researchers at the University of Groningen documented this phenomenon in 2008, observing that unconscious mimicry of gesture and expression correlates directly with feelings of liking and trust between strangers. And the brain reads physical similarity as emotional. And similarity, recognizes NLP practitioners weaponize this reflex deliberately. The technique is straightforward. And now watch the other person's body language. Breathe at their pace. Inject the speed and volume of their speech. Not immediately, but gradually, so the shift is below the threshold of conscious notice. Adopt a posture that mirrors theirs without being a caricature. Within minutes, something shifts in the other person. They lean in slightly. Their guard drops. And they begin to feel, without knowing why, that this person understands them, that this person is somehow like them. And once rapport is established through mirroring, the practitioner begins to lead. And they shift their own posture, slow their breathing, lower their voice. And poorest the rapport is now strong. The other person follows unconsciously. Their physiology shifts. And with the physiology comes the emotional state. And this is called pacing and leading. And it is the backbone of every high-trust manipulation in existence. A toxic partner uses it instinctively. In the early stages of a relationship, they are everything the other person needs. They mirror interests, values, communication styles, energy. The feeling of being deeply understood is intoxicating because genuine understanding is rare and precious. But the mirroring is not understanding. It is reflection. And when the reflection stops, when the mask shifts, and the person on the receiving end experiences a confusion so severe, it often takes years of therapy to untangle. In peace, what they fell in love with was a mirror of themselves, not a person. And the defense is not suspicion of everyone who seems to understand you. The defense is time. Mirroring that is manipulative cannot sustain itself. Genuine character requires consistency across contexts, across moods, across years, and pay attention to how a person behaves when they are not performing conic. Intent, that is the real information. The third mechanism is where things become genuinely unsettling. Fire. It is called the embedded command, and it operates below the level of conscious sentence comprehension. Language is processed in layers. Into surface layer, grammar, word choice, literal meaning is what the conscious mind engages with. But underneath that layer, and the brain is also processing rhythm, emphasis, implication, and structure in ways that bypass rational evaluation entirely. And this is the layer that advertising has always known about. It is the layer that political speech has always known about. And it is the layer that NLP codified and made systematic. An embedded command is an instruction hidden inside a larger sentence and delivered with a subtle shift in tonality. Slightly slower, slightly lower in pitch. Into your the unconscious mind registers it as a command, while the conscious mind hears only a statement or a question. Here is a simple example. The sentence, "I don't know how quickly you'll start to feel comfortable with this decision," contains the embedded command into feel comfortable with this decision. Conscious mind processes the hedging, "I don't know how quickly," and registers it as an open, non-pressuring statement. And the unconscious mind hears the instruction embedded inside and begins to comply. And Milton Erickson, the hypnotherapist, whose work Grinder and Bandler studied most closely, used this structure constantly in therapeutic sessions. His patients often described feeling that they had arrived at their own insights. In many cases, Erickson had simply planted the seed in a language their defenses could not detect. In a sales context, embedded commands are everywhere once the eye is trained. What would it feel like to own this? Many people find that they decide quite easily once they see the full picture. You might notice yours, starting to imagine this in your life. Each sentence, parsed consciously, sounds like a question or a friendly observation. And pursed at the level of embedded structure, each one is a directive. Politicians use them without always knowing the technical term. And cult leaders use them with extraordinary precision. And the leader who says, "I would never ask you to give up your relationships for this community," has just placed the idea of giving up relationships into every listener's mind, framed in denial, which paradoxically amplifies rather than removes its power. And the brain does not process negation the same way it processes positive instruction. And told not to think of a blue elephant, the blue elephant appears immediately, every time. Enveloping resistance to embedded commands requires one unusual practice: slow consumption. When someone is speaking quickly, maintaining eye contact, using gesture and rapport simultaneously. And cognitive load makes embedded processing nearly impossible to catch in real time. Slow down, read transcripts of speeches, and listen to recordings. The structure becomes visible only when the performance is separated from the content. And the fourth mechanism is presupposition, and it is the foundation on which the other three rest. A presupposition is something assumed to be true by the structure of a sentence, never stated, never argued for, simply taken as given. Every sentence carries presuppositions. Language cannot function without them. And manipulation begins when those presuppositions do the work that evidence was supposed to do. And a salesperson asks, which package makes more sense for your situation? In the standard or the premium? They are not asking whether you want to buy. And they have presupposed the purchase and are simply asking which version. The conscious mind engages with the either-or choice. The prior question, and do I want this at all, has been quietly bypassed. When a cult leader says, when you finally understand what I'm teaching, you'll see how lost you were before. Two things are presupposed: that understanding will come eventually, and that the current state is one of lostness. And the follower's mind accepts both as given and begins to orient around them. Resistance to the teaching gets reframed as proof of the lostness. And a controlling partner says, I know you don't mean to hurt me when you do things like that. The presupposition is that the behavior was unworkful. Whether the interpretation is accurate, whether the framing is fair, none of that gets examined. And the conversation moves directly to the implied guilt, and the person on the receiving end finds themselves apologizing for something they may not have done, and defending themselves against a charge that was never formally made. And presuppositions are difficult to challenge because they are never stated. They exist in the grammar, not the vocabulary, and calling them out requires a specific skill. In learning to ask not, is this claim true, but what is this sentence taking for granted? That second question, once it becomes habitual, and changes the experience of every conversation. And the fifth mechanism is reframing, and it is the one that, used well, is genuinely transformative, and used badly is genuinely dangerous. A frame is the context through which a piece of information is interpreted. In the same fact, placed inside two different frames, produces two entirely different emotional and cognitive responses. This is not spin. This is how human meaning-making works at a fundamental level. The question is, who controls the frame? And Viktor Frankl survived 3 years in Nazi concentration camps and wrote afterward that the one freedom that could never be taken was to choose one's response to any and too might. That is a reframe, one of the most powerful in recorded history. The experience of suffering, placed inside the frame of chosen response rather than passive victimhood. and became the foundation of an entire therapeutic tradition called logotherapy. An NLP practitioner uses the same mechanism. A client who describes herself as too sensitive gets asked, in what situation is that same quality a strength? The quality hasn't changed, and the frame has. And in the new frame, the client can access a different set of responses. That is the legitimate use. Here's the other one. A manipulator who has been caught in a lie says, I only kept that from you because I was trying to protect you. In the fact, deception has not changed. The frame has. And in the new frame, the deception becomes care. Informed person, now confused, finds themselves wondering whether their anger is actually ingratitude. A cult that demands financial contributions from members who can barely afford food reframes poverty as spiritual commitment. The universe rewards those who give from their lack. In behavior, financial exploitation is unchanged. The frame makes it feel like devotion. Framing is everywhere. It is in every political narrative about war and peace. It is in every corporate statement about layoffs and restructuring for growth. It is in every relationship where one person consistently redefines the other's reality until that person can no longer trust their own. In perception of events, the protection is not cynicism about all reframing. Because good reframing is one of the most powerful tools for genuine growth and recovery that exists. And the protection is authorship. The question to ask in any reframe is who benefits from this new interpretation? If the answer is the person offering it and not the person receiving it, stop. Look at the fact again without the F. Imreem. Ask what it means on its own terms before the context was added. In Maba mechanisms, anchoring, mirroring, embedded commands, presupposition, reframing. Each one is a legitimate feature of human communication. Each one is also a potential instrument of manipulation. And the line between the two is not in the technique, it is in the intent and in the consent. A therapist who anchors positive emotional states in a client who is rebuilding after loss is using the same neurological lever as the salesperson who anchors confidence to override a client's financial hesitation. And the technique is identical. One is in service of the client's flourishing, and the other is in service of the practitioner's commission. This is the uncomfortable reality that NLP has always lived with. Its founders disagreed bitterly and publicly. Bandler sued Grinder over intellectual property, and the field fractured into competing schools, each claiming legitimacy and often operating without ethical oversight. Industry absorbed the toolkit without the caution. The sales training industry absorbed it without the ethics. And the result is a world in which these patterns are deployed constantly on enormous scale, against people who have no framework for recognizing them. And knowing they exist is the first layer of defense. Understanding how each one works is the second. And the third, the one that matters most in daily life, is building the internal habit of pausing when something feels off. Enthusiasm appears without a clear source. when a decision that felt difficult suddenly feels obvious. When guilt arrives before any wrong has been clearly identified. And when an explanation offered quickly and with great warmth somehow makes the original concern disappear. That pause is not paranoia, and that pause is the rational mind re-engaging after the unconscious has been nudged, and it is in that pause that autonomy lives. The world is full of people who have studied the architecture of persuasion and use it with precision. And some of them are selling insurance. Some of them are leading movements. And to bake, some of them are sitting at dinner tables, in bedrooms, in offices. They are not monsters. Most of them would not describe what they do as manipulation at all. And they would say they are communicating effectively, motivating others, leading with confidence. Then, in the word for someone who cannot see the difference between effective communication and manipulation is not evil. It is unconscious. And the most dangerous manipulators are often the most unconscious ones, and the ones who have absorbed these patterns so thoroughly that they apply them reflexively, without calculation, and genuinely believe that the reality they are constructing for others is the truth. And quiet, which is why the most important skill in this world is not the ability to detect manipulation in strangers. It is the ability to examine one's own language, to notice when one is presupposing rather than arguing, reframing rather than acknowledging, injuring rather than connecting. And the toolkit works on the person wielding it too. People train themselves into their own frames and cannot see outside them. Leaders convince themselves their followers are choosing freely. Partners convince themselves that control is love. Awareness is not comfortable. It never has been. In the bed, it is the only thing that stands between a person and a life shaped entirely by forces they never chose to accept. And the mind is not a blank slate waiting for instructions. It is a living system with its own logic, its own patterns, its own vulnerabilities. In neuro-linguistic programming did not create those vulnerabilities. It simply mapped them. And the map exists now in classrooms and training seminars and self-help books and corporate retreats, a key in Chonad. World. The question is not whether someone is using it. The question is whether the person it is being used on knows it exists. Now that viewer does. If this opened something for the viewer, a memory of a conversation that now looks different, a relationship that suddenly makes more sense, a sales pitch that finally has a name, and share that in the comments, the specific moment, the specific pattern. Naming it out loud is its own kind of anchor, and this one belongs to the viewer. If this content deserves a place in someone else's understanding, in the like button and the subscribe, make sure the next piece of the picture reaches them. Just video goes deeper. The viewer will want to be there